If you're having story problems, all roads lead to the hero's outer motivation. Because one of the biggest issues, one of the most difficult things for writers to really embrace is this idea that at the very foundation of any story is a visible goal that the hero wants to cross at the end of the story. They'll get so caught up in the inner journey, in the depth or dimension of the character, or in the themes they want to deliver, or they'll just think the premise is good, so they get lost in a thicket of events and plotting until finally they're just coming up with new ideas and adding idea after idea, and it becomes so complicated and so confusing that there's no story there. If you think about it, most Hollywood movies in particular are based on very simple story ideas. Even if you take a story that you think is fairly complex, like Inception, okay? That seems pretty complicated. I had a little trouble grasping some of that, but it's very core, it's very simple. A group of people wants to penetrate a person's dreams down to a layer where they can change his behavior without him knowing it. And that's it. I was able to say that in what, 5 seconds and 1 sentence. And that, everything is built on that goal. And if you have that kind of clear through line, and if when you say what that goal is, everybody gets the same image of what achieving that goal is, then you've laid a foundation that most scripts don't honestly have. And it's odd because it sounds simple. It is simple, but it's not easy. Because I think for those of us who write, or for storytellers, we so want to get into character, we so want to get into deeper levels of meaning, we so want it to be original and different and complex and special that we lose sight of, first I've got to have this very simple through line. So that's the number one thing. One of the biggest problem in stages 1 and 2 is it doesn't lead to a clear, visible finish line that anyone can envision, whether they're reading the script or watching the movie. They know what they're rooting for.
Having an active hero who has a clear want is definitely a huge thing that I work with writers on, because it's really thinking about, I mean, I think when I first started consulting, one of the biggest questions I asked was, what does the central character want? If I don't know that, the story doesn't work. Every strong story starts with a trigger incident or inciting incident, as many people term it, that pushes the central character into a powerful dilemma. Then the choice that is made in the dilemma is what defines the external goal for the A story. And every obstacle, escalating obstacle, and all is lost moment need to link back to that choice. And when the goal isn't clear, the story doesn't work. Because everything needs to link back to, like, there are countless features as well as TV shows where in the middle of the story, you have no idea what the central character wants. Like, you've lost it because the actions and obstacles aren't linked to the desire, and we lose a sense of what the desire was. So when you do that, story doesn't work. And very often writers will write a passive hero that isn't taking action.
The concept is, what I call soft concepts. There's nothing in the concept to make me want to see the story. When you think about how you choose to watch a movie, usually you see the poster or you see a tagline or you see a trailer. You can tell. You like analyze how you feel about it when you see it. And you go, usually for me it's the concept. When I know what a concept is about, when I read about a script that's sold and they say, story is about this and this and this, so you have the log line. Right there I know whether the movie is going to be successful or not, just from that, because either the log line has a hook to it and you go, oh my God, that's interesting. Or, and that feeling, that is that's why producers or agents don't request your scripts, because they're just, the concept is just too flat or cliche. But if something is really, there's a hook to it, they're going to at least request the script and they're going to read it. Now the script might be flawed and it's going to get a pass anyway, but at least it's going to be requested. So if you really have a great concept, which is what I recommend, go for that. Make sure your concept has a hook.
One of the things with assignments that I have to find a doorway into an assignment. So if I am offered a deal, if I'm offered something that I read a book, whatever, some assignment where they're going to hire you to write the script, I have to look at that and go, how is this story my story, so I can tell it honestly? Because if it has nothing to do with me, then I'm just taking money and typing. And the bad part about that is the script will not work. The worst part about it is then you may have to do it a couple of rewrites after that on a script that becomes torture. It's like, I'm just typing this, I'm just writing it, I have no connection to the story. So then it becomes work. And if any of us wanted to do work, we wouldn't be writers.
Any story is organically just ingrained in the heart and the mind and the soul of the writer. And a writer really needs to know himself and know what kinds of stories he's uniquely designed to tell, and stick with those things. And sometimes, especially when it's a job, it's the temptation is there to jump on that idea and say, yes, I want to do that. I don't know anything about Eskimos, but I can learn, by gum. But if that's a story where they have no context and not only just personal experience, but something that really doesn't speak to their heart or their mind or their soul, then they're not the right person for that story. And the best stories come from writers who can combine their own passions, their own interests, the stories that really speak to them and who they are as human beings. And they're able to tie in those themes that they're grappling with and wrestling with as people, as human beings, and then apply that to the story or to the project.
The Finland story was a producer that had a deal with Finland and came to me and said, we want to do a complete ripoff of Taken. And I'm like, I don't see that. But I said, can I work with this and pitch it back to you? And they said, okay, so they were open to that, which was great. So I basically came up with a story about a novelist who's on a book tour to Finland, who writes action books, because he's a famous novelist, ends up getting invited to the World Wilderness Federation meeting. The Vice President of the United States is one of the keynote speakers, as are all these other dignitaries. And so he goes there with his wife, and his wife wears the exact same color dress as the Vice President. And when bad guys come to kidnap the Vice President's wife, they get his wife by mistake. So now we sort of have our Taken situation. So we have like the wrong woman is kidnapped, and now he's got to go from being this guy who is a novelist who writes action stories to the action guy. And so he knows all of this stuff, but has to put it into practice now. So I could write that story. When I pitched it back to them, they said, that sounds great. And so I got that job. So sometimes when they give you the parameters, the outside parameters of the assignment, you can find the story inside that kind of fits within that. So this is like Taken, but it's got my own sort of spin on it where I can tell the story. And of course, husband and wife get closer and closer as from this story, because now that her life is threatened, they rekindle their relationship and all this fun stuff that happens that works for me as the writer, So that's the thing. You find your story in whatever they have, or if you don't, it's a bad idea to take that job. Wait, some other job will come.
When a writer is developing a story idea, right at the beginning of the writing process, they come up against the biggest decision that they will have to make, which is, what genre is this story? The biggest reason that writers fail at the premise, and by the way, 99% of scripts fail at the premise line, right at the very first decision in the writing process. The biggest reason it fails is not that it wasn't a good idea, it's that they used the wrong genre to develop the idea. Genre is really the key to understanding screenwriting today. And it comes from what I call the first rule of Hollywood, which is that Hollywood doesn't buy and sell movie stars, directors, or writers. It buys and sells genres. Now, genres are story forms. And more importantly, they are the all-stars of the story world. They are story forms that have been told over decades, centuries, and in some cases, like with myth, thousands of years. So they've already been worked out. And they've been worked out very, very great detail. And they know exactly how their characters work. They know what their themes are. They know how the plot is going to work and so on. So it's very, very tight. Now, in order to sell to a worldwide audience, you have to use these different genres because this is what the audience is really buying. When an audience goes to see one of the big summer blockbuster films, they may not know it in their head, oh, that's a myth-based film, or that's an action film, or a combination of the two, but they know what they like. And that's what's underneath each one of those stories. Avengers, Dark Knight, so on. These are all just basic story forms, basic genres with a unique skin placed on top. So it's very important, first of all, for the writer to understand what genres they are working in. It's also very important for them to understand how to combine their genres, because almost every film that gets made now is not a single genre. That was decades ago. Now, almost every film that gets made, not just in Hollywood, but in worldwide cinema, is a combination of 2, 3, and sometimes 4 genres. Now, a lot of writers know this. What they don't know, they usually don't know, is that combining genres is very difficult, because each genre has its own hero, its own opponent, its own desire line, theme, and so on. So when you start combining these, typically you end up with chaos. You end up with so many story elements that are unconnected that the script doesn't work. So it's very important to understand how to put these genres together.
Not showing the everyday life of the character before they get into the story moving forward. We have to have a setup. It can be very brief, or a character can be on the move, so to speak, action-wise. They can have just arrived in a town and we see them going, or they're going to a meeting, or going to meet with a hitman, or whatever it might be. But nonetheless, it has to convey this is who this character's been for some time, and it has to create empathy.
Like Rambo. He arrives.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Brian Dennehy
So we'll
season.
find out what happened prior to that, but the first big event that's going to happen to him doesn't happen on page 1. We first have to get acquainted and identify or empathize with this character. And that empathy must occur immediately. We have to empathize before we start seeing what the flaws to the character are, before we start recognizing what this inner conflict is, or what this identity is, or what dark places they might go. First, we have to just connect with them emotionally.
Another mistake that writers make is they have a single goal that they have ascribed to their protagonist, their main character. And because if the character just went on a straight line, they'd achieve the goal in 15, 20, 30 pages, they create obstacles to keep the character from the goal, conflict. But in a comedy, you often have your initial goal, which is based upon the wrong thinking of the character, and then you have the eventual true goal, which the character only discovers midway through the film. I can think of dozens of films like that, where in Groundhog Day, Bill Murray just wants to be a newscaster, a weatherman at a bigger station, and then along the way he realizes that he loves Rita, and he wants to get Rita. In Wedding Crashers, their goal is just to bang as many women as they want, but then he meets the girl, and then it all becomes, how do I get with her if I've been a fraud my whole life. So more important than creating obstacles to impede your hero from attaining the goal, you want to create learning moments, aha moments, primal moments, moments of discovery, moments of revelation that teach your hero, give your hero something like, in Chris Vogler's The Hero's Journey, you're actually giving him the magic implements that he'll be able to use later on to solve the problem, to save the princess. Shrek, talking about saving a princess, again, Shrek just starts off wanting people out of the swamp, get everybody out of my swamp. And then in order to do that, they give him another task. I have to go save the princess. But in order to do that, I have to beat the dragon. But now that I've beaten the dragon, or actually the dragon's fallen in love with my donkey, now I have to get the princess back just to get my swamp back to normal. But by then, he's fallen in love with the princess. And he wants the princess, so his goals change. Your initial goal is often not the goal your protagonist ends up with, or ends up trying to achieve.
Another mistake writers will make is they'll choose the wrong lead. They'll develop another character more with regards to backstory and empathy than they will their lead.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they choose the wrong lead.
Jumping from the setup right to the outer motivation. In other words, I think because screenwriters are inundated with the idea that you got to grab the reader right away and you got to get things going and Hollywood movies move fast and so on. All of that is true, but it doesn't mean you rush the story. What it means is you start building in conflict as soon as you can, but you don't rush the story. It's going to take all of Act 1 to get your hero to the point where they really begin pursuing that visible finish line. And if you start at page 10 with them pursuing the goal, your script is going to die around page 70 because you can't sustain a single goal that long. So you've got to take the whole stage 1 and stage 2 just to build up, to create the opportunity in the new situation, to get them oriented, to build up to the point where they have the goal and then they take that first step. And that's what has to happen at 25%.
Bad stories, by the way, don't have this. And that's part of why they're bad. Most movies are bad. Most television is bad. And it's applying the tools properly that makes part of what makes the stories great. It's simple, but unless you're conscious of it, you won't do it. If you don't have good news, bad news, raising stakes, and ticking clocks on every page of your story's going to be boring. But hardly anyone teaches that. And being conscious of how those tools work is how you start putting them on every page. And by the way, these suspense tools work in drama, they work in romantic comedy, they work in every genre, and they work in television too.
So each page of a script has to have those elements?
It's better if it does, yes. If you go and look at a Tarantino script, or you go and look at a Chris Nolan script, or you go and look at a Lynn script, you will see on every page, once you've been shown it, that every page has ticking clocks. Every page has good news, bad news. Every page has raising stakes. A lot of them have other suspense tools too, but writers are often unaware of this consciously. They don't build this into their stories when they write them. So just being aware that this is how, and they're cheap tricks, by the way. It's good news. I'm giving you $20. Bad news, I'm slapping you. Ticking clocks is just a bomb ticking down. It's a gun pointed at someone. These are not sophisticated tricks. They're simple. But the greatest artists use them in all of their best work. You've never seen a Tarantino script that didn't have 3 or 4 pointed guns in nearly every scene. It's cheap, and it works like a charm. It entertains. And that's why we also see these in television. Breaking Bad is nothing but a series of excruciating suspense devices. So excruciating, I couldn't even get Ceci to watch it. And when you sit down to watch Breaking Bad, you often have to stop because it's so repellently tension-making. But that's what makes it great.
There's writers who do not understand conflict. They don't know what conflict is. They write scenes that are basically two people talking and just revealing exposition. So it's kind of like they just want the audience to know certain things about their character or their past or about the story. But this is the writer's intention in the scene, not the character's intention. So you get these scenes that are just basically talking heads, just exposition. That's the most boring thing there is. We're not grabbed, no matter how interesting the information is.
What it means for writers in practical terms is to stay open to the surprises. If you have a real idea in advance exactly how it's going to go, that's going to lock you in and narrow you and stunt your creativity. Your character is going to surprise you. They're going to do things that you never thought they would do, that they seem to invent on their own to do. And that's what I was talking earlier about, which is discovery. And that the biggest mistake you can make is to try to haul it back. If it runs off the rails a little bit, that's great. Go with it and see where that takes you. And be surprised by, be willing to be surprised by where you end up with it. Because otherwise it becomes intellectual, it becomes heady. And we need our heads, we need our intellect, but not in the movie theater. That's a place where we live, not in the head, but in the heart, in the belly, in the groin. It's not about understanding and knowing. It's about feeling. It's about passion. There's a really important place in our lives for rational, intelligent, expansive discourse and discussion, but not in the movies. The movies is a safe place to work out the lethal aspects of our nature, to go hog wild and buck naked and crazy as a loon. That's what art is for.
Certainly from the first script to the second script, there was a big jump in structure. And I think that in refining the structure. And I think that what caused that was with the first script, I had what I thought was a good idea, but I didn't have the follow through the whole way. Like, I was like, well, I'm going to find the story in the middle. I had the ending, which changed. So I was, receptive to going into it because I had the beginning and the ending. But I really didn't. I allowed myself too much room kind of in the middle. So the story meandered and characters kind of came and went and things of that nature. With the next script, I didn't really outline in the traditional sense. I didn't go this scene that, or have, index cards or anything of that nature. But what I did was I kind of laid out my characters and said, here's how they're going to grow. Because here's my beginning and here's my ending, and here's how they're going to kind of get from here to here, okay? And I'm going to allow myself some room to go, but not so much, And I wrote that script very, very quickly because of that. Like, I had the story and it flowed more freely from me. And, so when I got to the third script, there was this idea that, okay, it worked there. This is a completely different story, and there were two totally different stories from second to third. But I kind of get what works for me now. Like, I kind of get what keeps me from wandering off too far, And I think that was one of the biggest differences for sure.
If all you're doing is stringing together obstacles to overcome, and there's a very similar mistake, and that is people who think comedy is one funny thing after another happening. That's not what a story is. A story is the sequence of events experienced by a hero who's pursuing a very specific goal. So if you're just throwing one obstacle after another, but we don't care about the hero, or the hero, it's not clear why the hero is doing this or what they're trying to achieve, or if those obstacles are illogical, or if the pace of the story lags, or if everything is at a very high level of emotion and you're not creating sort of peaks and valleys to the emotional level, so you have big moments and quiet moments and moments of connection and moments of separation and so on. There are all those things you've got to do in addition to throwing a bunch of, car chases and fight scenes up on the screen, which many people have tried, and those movies don't succeed. If it's just car chases and fight scenes, it's just, it's just a series of videos really, but it's not a story or a movie that people are going to be involved in. Well, it has to alternate, yeah. It's not a resting point as if you stay there forever, but it's like in a comedy, you don't want joke, 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 joke. There's got to be a serious moment or two. And look at any great comedy, look at even any decent comedy, and there's going to be something very funny, but then there's going to be something touching or sad or romantic, or there's going to be a deeper connection between the characters, or there's going to be something more exciting, or there's going to be something softer. You want to vary the peaks and valleys, the emotional level and pitch of the story as we go steadily toward the finish line that the hero is trying to reach. So the obstacles need to get bigger. They need to come closer together as it moves forward so the pace will accelerate. But if there's only obstacles, one right after the other, with no chance to catch our breath, no chance to anticipate what might be coming, no chance to explain what's going on, and no chance to get closer or deeper into the characters, it's going to be a very, very shallow story with very limited emotional involvement or appeal.
I think you need to understand the character, understand the way the character thinks. Often we start out with, when you're looking at it just from the nuts and bolts story, you go, okay, that's my villain, this is my hero, that's the love interest, and you come up with the archetypes, and then what we need to do is shade in those characters so that they're unlike any other hero, villain, love interest, sidekick, whatever we've seen before. They're the individual. And so when we shade it in, that's the developing the character. We're taking a character and taking him from stick figure and shading them in so they're three-dimensional. Which, one of the things that I think is important is to know why your villain is right and why your hero is wrong, or protagonist and antagonist. Because often what happens is people don't know why their protagonist is wrong. Their protagonist is 100% right. Or why their antagonist is right, is on the right track. And people are multidimensional, we're not all good and bad. So to find the good in the bad character and the bad in the good character are critical to making that a three-dimensional character. And that's a tough thing for a lot of new writers, is they just want to have their hero wants to be, as a projection of themselves, they're the perfect version of themselves. But the problem is a perfect person is dull. We like flawed people. We want, the example that I always use is Liar Liar, because Jim Carrey's character is a bad father and says so. And he is a terrible father. Now, he means to be a good father, but he's not. So that character flaw being the guy that, his biggest character flaw is he believes that a lie is better than the truth. So he lies to everybody so as to not hurt their feelings, and instead hurts their feelings twice as bad when they find out that it's a lie. But he is a character that's not 100% perfect. He's a bad father. And his journey from bad father to good father is what the story's about. And often what happens is new writers don't want to have that journey. They want to have the character be a good father all the way through because I'm a good person and this character is kind of part of me, and so they're going to be always good, and they don't want to explore the bad part of themselves. And we all have those. None of us are perfect people. We all are flawed. So you need to sort of dig into yourself often and find the bad parts of you and deal with those, on screen. Did I already say you're basically you're taking the things you wouldn't tell your best friend and telling, 100 million people worldwide. That's part of that.
When you're really being authentic as a writer, then definitely it's a way of being honest and true. And I think people really respond to authenticity, and they know when you're not being authentic. When I wrote my first screenplay, my brother, who's an incredible writer, like he started writing screenplays and now he's a novelist. And I actually tried to get him to write my very first screenplay, Jar by the Door. I had written a treatment for it. And he was like, oh, this is great. This could be a really good script. No, I'm not going to write it for you. Learn how to write it and write it yourself. I was like, but you do it already. He was like, nope, you have to do it. So the reason I brought him up was he was the first person to read my very first draft. And he read it and he was like, this is really great. It's almost there, but there's stuff in it that is not real. It's not authentic. And you're just kind of not, you're sort of touching at some stuff, but you're dancing around it. And he's like, you really have to take the gloves off and be real with your characters and let them talk in a real way. And he was specifically talking about the lead character, which was slightly fashioned after me. And he was like, that's not a real person. He was like, maybe it's too close to you, but you have to let go of that and just let it be authentic how that person would respond. Even yourself, you've made her too nice and too good and too, and I was like, but that is me. And he was like, yeah, right. Can we get a little truth in here? And so I rewrote it with his notes, and it's like a much better script because I let the characters really be human and real and messy and all that stuff, you know.
A good writer needs a built-in bullshit detector. And the bullshit isn't for other people. The bullshit is for you. Because you are going to spout a whole bunch of bullshit as a writer. And you are going to give us the perfect version. And you are going to give us the I'm flawless version. And that's your bullshit. You need to cut out your bullshit and get to the reality, which is ugly and we don't ever want to think about it. But we're flawed people, and those flaws are going to somehow come out on screen.
Once I learned that lesson from my brother, I really understood that the characters are more interesting, and they're more, people can relate to them more, so they're more relatable when they do have faults, because we all do. And when we actually show those faults, it balances everything out, you know, because there's something that people can relate to. And you know, any character that has faults. I mean, it's more, I think we do it more these days. Than we did before.
Yeah.
So like you might have a villain who has some really nice qualities, or you have the protagonist who has some really just awful qualities. We still root for him and we still like him. We're like, well, you know, everybody has their stuff, even this person.
When I staffed 15 shows and I would meet with writers up to an hour at a time, what I was looking for in that hour is, are they accessible to their own story? They might be able to say, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, but not be vulnerable in the revelation of that process. And a large part of what I was looking for staffing wise was, is that a well that can be accessed? Or is the ego, or is the wall too big to where it isn't something that is penetrable? So I think, and I will talk with writers about this directly. I'll say things like, you need to recognize that your gold as a writer is being able to communicate what you've gone through and recognize that it's almost like you need to detach from your story and not connect shame with it. It's your story. It's what you're drawing from. And I'm going to tell you, executives, the greatest thing they want to know is how big is your well. And the more vulnerability that you show in a meeting with regards to why you'd be the perfect writer to write on this show and have a backup of personal stories that exemplify why you be the best writer, that's what will land you a job. So being vulnerable is key in that process.
If your theme is going to be, you know, something very gritty and intense, emotionally or psychologically, you got to be ready to go there. and travel into that dark place perhaps, and be, live it. And a lot of writers just aren't. I had an experience once with a project where it was about a mother-daughter thing, and I think we tell the story in the book where the producer said to the writer, "You're just not going there in this scenes between the mother and daughter, the tension." And it turned out the writer had real mother-daughter issues, and she was afraid to go into that place. So they kept trying to get her to go there, and she just wouldn't, because she was afraid what her mother would think. But she's also afraid to she needed therapy before she could write that movie.
Well, and conversely, some writers are so there that they can't turn it into a story, and that's the other side of the coin, is that sometimes writers need to pull back from personal experience. And when we consult with writers, a lot of them say, "Well, this really happened to me,"
and we want to,
and we're like, "No, we need to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end here." And many of our own personal stories don't resolve that same way.
It's not an audience's or a reader's job to feel something. That's something you have to elicit. So it means you haven't created sufficient conflict in your story to elicit emotion, or you haven't created a premise, a concept of a story, you haven't structured it in such a way that that conflict makes any sense, or it can be emotionally involving because you've given the reader nothing to root for, or you haven't created empathy with the hero, or whatever it might be. But it's your job to elicit emotion. The emotion has to come naturally from the reader and audience because of what you've done. They have to be participating in the story you've created. That's why, for example, empathy is so important for the hero, for you to create for your hero, because a story is a participatory experience for the audience or the listener or the reader. We become that character. We want to experience the emotion as they do. We don't go to the movies because it's interesting to watch people do things. It's emotional for us to get to do them. We become Jason Bourne. We become Rose as she falls in love with Jack and is on the Titanic. We become the astronaut who's out in space in Gravity. We are a part of it. We're participating in the action and the events of that story. But we have no basis, no way to get into the story if we don't, on a subconscious level, become the hero of that story. And that's what the empathy and identification you create at the beginning is going to do. So if you've created a story with an empathetic hero, so we participate, given them a clear goal, and created enough logical, believable obstacles to overcome, then the emotion will grow organically out of your audience because they're in it and you've created the conflict that will do that.
I've had 10 friends with cancer. Since my own divorce, I've probably helped 25 people through divorce. And there is, like, when you first go through the divorce or the diagnosis, there is a crazy time that's happening psychologically. An absolute shift has happened in your world, and that shift can cause you to be overly emotional, and yet the gift is be in the over emotion, and know that it is going to scale back in time. So I think if I have a writer who's too raw and too in it, I'll say to them, like, maybe now isn't the right time for you to explore this specific thing. Maybe you should take a break from this and write something that is a little removed from the pain that is involved with this story. And I have found that works a lot. And then when they come back to it, they're ready to move through it. Like, say, for example, when I wrote Change Your Story, Change Your Life, it was enough time had passed since I had gone through that loss that I was ready to explore it. And I was ready to be responsible for my own part in the outcome. And I think when you're going through healing and when you're going through trauma, that It's just part of the life process. So I think there's, in my opinion, an advantage to being over emotional, but knowing when you have to scale back and when you have to take a break and then re-explore so that you can utilize that emotion, but come from a stronger place because you've had more time to process it.
The truth is that probably the number one reason why we find problems in screenplays is that it was the wrong writer for that story, for that project. It's amazing how people will sign up for something that they're ill-equipped to do, from for several different senses, right? So the first sense of being the wrong writer for the project is just that this project is too technical for your skill level. So this happens a lot with people's passions projects, where they have this dream movie that they've wanted to write since they were 7, but then they start to learn screenwriting and they start on that movie. And no, that should be like your 5th movie or maybe your 3rd movie, but certainly not your first one. And so there's just this, the first level is just, you're not good enough yet to take on a project of that scope. Maybe it's too many characters, it's too complex in its story, the structure is just going to require more from you than you're able to give. So, and then the second, another part of that is sometimes it's going to require a lot of research from you that you're just not able to commit to, especially if you're learning your craft. People tend to be focused on learning the craft and not have time, to go off to the Yukon to research, how Eskimos, make whale meat or something. Like that kind of weird complexity that in a story in terms of research is the wrong project to start with. So a research-heavy project shouldn't be your first project. A very technical project with a lot of characters, an ensemble piece, shouldn't be your first project. So from one level, you have to measure the projects you take on according to the skill set you have, and as it grows, the projects can be more complex. And just think of it like any other skill-based craft. If you're an architect, you don't build your skyscraper first. You start with a doghouse, you build a garage, and then you work your way up. So one of the reasons we see writers set themselves up to fail technically, because they haven't really assessed the needs of the project and their own craft level.
One thing is to think that there's just one draft and that it's going to flow out of them and that there's nothing to learn, as opposed to that sense of a process. But there is a very fine balance between one's art and one's craft. The place that the flow happens, the place where you feel your voice is coming out, and the shaping of the voice, the shaping of what that artistic form is. And one has to be careful about that balance, because you learn a lot about craft, but this is an art form. It's not a paint by numbers. It's not saying, oh, my first turning point is on page 27 instead of 32. Oh my, is say, well, let's look more carefully, because maybe you're exactly in the right place for that. And so there can be, when people take seminars or read books, they can get into the paint by numbers, or on the other hand, you can have people who are, so into their art that they don't want to learn. And I always say you can't use it if you don't know it. So knowledge doesn't hurt you. It just has to be put in its right place. I know that when I write my nonfiction books, I presume every chapter will be rewritten at least 5, a minimum, but generally about 10 times. That'll be gone over and over. I asked an Emmy Award-winning screenwriter once, I said, how many times do you rewrite? And she said, well, this morning I rewrote the scene 22 times. And my guess is she probably was, whether 22 was because she was a comedy writer, but my guess is it wasn't 4 times. And going over and over and saying this word resonates better, or not having this line of dialogue, but having an image instead, or having a reaction. Oh yeah, that is better. And so you massage. I mean, you really are reworking and reworking and reworking. And sometimes people think, well, the great writers, I guess it just flows. And you say, no, the great writers are probably rewriting more than the merely good writers. And get used to the rewrite process, and get used to feedback, and get used to honing and tweaking, and recognize that's the process.
Always thinking that it can be better. And you know, most work can be better, but there is a point of diminishing returns, right? There is a point where you are just switching around your wordsmithing, and you're really, the returns are, you improve it by 1%, by 0.5%. That's not going to do it. So when is the work ready? When is it strong enough? When do you believe in your work? And a lot of writers feel very, very confident writing, but not confident at all getting the work out there. So at some point you have to understand, okay, this is what it is. This is what I wanted it to be. I'm a big believer in feedback. So getting feedback from people that you trust, who have some experience and knowledge in the industry, be they other working writers or consultants like Michael Haig or Jen Grisanti that you've talked to, or script readers that are known for being really hard on the work, when they say, you know what, it's good, get it out there, at some point you have to let go. At some point you have to say, yeah, I can futz with it forever. And you can, I promise you that you can, and I've seen writers do it. And I've had fights with writers who've done it, who just would harp on the same script. You have to accept it for the potential that it has. You have to question whether or not you've realized that potential. Did you do what you wanted to do with the script? Did you write the story that you wanted to tell? Is it being received in the manner that you wanted it to be received? So are people getting it? Are they connecting with it? Are they enthused by it? If the answers to that is yes, then you get it out there. As much as rejection is part of the job, and it is part of the job, you are going to get rejected, and so you better grow it or develop a tougher skin. You will be rejected, get it out there. The point is to get that yes, and you have to get through a lot of no's to get that yes. But you have to get the work out there. It does no good for you on the shelf. It does no good for you sitting on the computer without anybody seeing it. Of course, you want to scrutinize that the work is up to par, right? You want to make sure that the work is strong and you're getting the feedback that it's strong enough for people who don't have to be nice to you. And that's a really big thing. So it can't just be your friends who are concerned about maintaining a friendship,
right.
Who are going to be a little bit more forgiving because they understand your intention, they know what you went for, you didn't quite get there, but they saw it enough. But people who will scrutinize your work and be demanding of it are telling you, it's good, get it out there, get it out there. That's how you build a career. You don't build a career with one script that you're precious about. You build a career writing great script after great script and getting a fan base that's excited about you, that's excited to read the next thing, that knows that the next thing is coming and want to be the first on the list to get it from you.
The mistakes would be desperation, insistence, where it's, no, you have to read this. Mine's the only story, and the more persistent and desperate you are, the more people back off. I mean, think of it if you were dating, no, you have to go out with me, and this is why, that's charming, right? So it's when I see people do that, immediately, they just sort of ruined it. The people that allow the breathing room in the relationship and let the words make somebody come to them, that's where deals happen, sales happen. But again, remember, this is mainly about getting your career going. This might be where you're hired. You're not always going to sell a screenplay. That screenplay is going to sell you. The idea that you feel like you're talking to a real person who has a story that they want to tell, who it's there, and the possibilities of it are exciting, and that the writer has made those possibilities evident to the listener, like, this is what I'm trying to get out there. Isn't that interesting? Oh yeah, it's interesting to me too. Okay, I'll read it.
At my class, the class which meets tonight, in the first class, I always brag about all of the scripts that got written in the class that became movies. Now, most of the people who succeed don't sell the scripts that they write in the class, much less have them made into movies. They use them as showcases. They win representation, they win development deals and rewrite assignments and other kinds of rewards. But there are some that have actually been written right in the classes that became movies. And I brag to the 8 writers around the table about those. The first thing I do. The next thing I do is I tell them, now, please don't try to sell the scripts that you write in this class. And then I take a long silence. And I let people think about what seems like a contradiction. I've just been bragging about all the scripts that have sold out of the class, and here I am saying, please don't try to sell the scripts that you read in the class. And I point out to the student that you write in the class. And then I point out to the writers that it's not a contradiction. I didn't say don't sell the scripts that you write in the class. I said don't try to sell the scripts that you write in the class. If you're thinking about the sale while you're working on it, you are doomed. You are lost. You're intellectualizing, you're calculating, you're getting into all kinds of processes that will militate against successful art. You're getting, again, too intellectual, too into your head when you think that way. You start to think about trends, what's popular, who might this be right for.
Brian Grazer, as an example, is, and Ron Howard, his partner. Ron's like, a very mellow guy. Brian is from another world, and he's brilliant. Like the last, I pitched him, sold him a movie once, and, I always bring in, I never, ever, ever look at my paper, if any young kid is listening, because it's like, who wants to hear anybody do an oral report, but I bring it in because, in case I, for some reason, forget where an act break is or whatever, and Brian, whose brain works like at a speed different than most humans, he's like, he vibrates, he's very energetic, and he can, think of like 18 things at once, and he's just a different kind of brain. It's a good brain, it's fast, but the first, he's like, oh, hey, hi, Gina, a little, how you doing? But within 2 minutes, not 2 minutes, 1 minute, he saw that I had, it was probably 5 sheets of paper. He goes, oh, shit, are you going to read that? Like, and, I'm like, no, don't worry. And he's like, I couldn't sit there for all that, and it's, when young writers go in with their paper and they're like, well, act 1, a seasoned producer is just gonna, they don't want to, their time is so valuable. I think a good rule of thumb for a young writer and or director, that's gotta, because when you get to a certain level, then they're trying to please you, but you always have to please somebody like Brian, because he's, it doesn't matter what level you are, Brian's brain is so fast. So, think of them like lawyers that you pay by the hour. Every second you're sitting there is costing you money because their time is really valuable. And
taxi driver too.
Yeah, exactly.
The meter's running.
Yeah, it's running, and the more that they're sitting with you, it's like they are where they are, not because they're polite. Like they're not going to sit there if they don't like what they're hearing because there's 1,000 of you. So you've got to be respectful of their time and come really prepared. And if you're not prepared, you have no business in the business, because whoever you're asking to help you, whether it's a help or buy something, this is the other thing that a lot of writers don't understand. They don't understand, in my mind, that you have to earn their attention to flip the page. Like a lot of writers, well, it gets better later. Well, to hell with later, It's like when I read a script of somebody's, if I'm not there in 10 pages, and I figure that's the same way, so a lot of writers are so, there's a difference between vanity and narcissism to me. All artists are narcissistic in order to think we have something to say that's worth it, It takes a certain, but vanity is thinking that you don't have to earn it. And, if you want me to take time away from television or getting a massage or eating or something that is an instant pleasure, you better make sure that's good to take my time. And that's, you have to have that respect for the studio and your friends and producers that you're, you know, some friends hand me these scripts and, you know, which is why it's never a good idea to show it to your friends, because A, you can't trust them, you know, and, you know, you're sitting there and you're reading Drek and you're like, you have no more respect for my time. Like, give it to me when it's good, you know, don't make me your proofer. Like, and that's a big thing with young writers. They're just so impressed with themselves, or young, any, you know, before they learn the thing of value, that to value the other person's energy.
I'll never forget when I was a studio executive, there was a certain circumstance where this happened, where we had the network, the studio, and the showrunners and the writer on the phone. And the writer was so defensive to the network notes. And it was my job to go to the writer and say, you need to really hear the note, understand the note, and then your best response that isn't going to put somebody on the defense or isolate someone is, I'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That helps to, first of all, it helps, it's positive on the writer. It's saying that they're open. It's not saying they agree with the note, but it's saying they're open to take a look at it. And that's all people want to know. What I think the biggest thing writers have to think about when it comes to receiving notes on their script is, even if they don't agree with the note at face value, they have to understand there might be a note under the note. And the note they need to make to themselves is, something isn't working. And I have to figure out how to make it work. Because if this person who knows story is not getting it, then there's something going on in my process that isn't working. And just be open to that.
I think everybody has this idea of failure, but nobody knows what it is, right? I'm going to fail and I'm going to go down in flames, and you're not. The only failure in screenwriting is A, not writing. I wrote a script 5 years ago. I'm running around with this one script. I haven't touched a typewriter or computer since then for any creative purposes. That is screenwriting failure. Not writing new content, not generating new content, harping on old content, not getting notes. Huge, huge, huge in the failure of things. If you are tunnel visioned and this is how it has to be, and anything short of this, as I saw it on the page, arrives on the screen, then it will be my failure. You will fail in that because this is, while writing is solitary, this is a highly collaborative industry. So the road to failure is not writing new material, not getting notes, wanting to be perfect. There is no perfection in this industry. It is all about getting notes, learning from notes, getting notes that you hate, figuring out what to do with them, because other people are going to have to buy in. So the road to failure is really being stunted.
Part of what I do with writers is, emotionally, I help them to work on what is holding them back. So just as in story, we understand there is a weakness or a flaw that is stopping the hero from achieving the goal. With the writers that I work with, I help them to work on what do they feel internally is holding them back. And very often, I think I can say writers who grasp my story system on structure mixed with they believe that they're going to be a working writer is what leads them to the outcome. So I would say it's, that's the ideal situation. It could be one or the other as well. Like I think story, just like in life, like when I think about everything that I learned through my 17 years of working in the business before I started my own business, and the knocks that I went through during that time, and the ego that was involved in a lot of that, and how through moving through the obstacles and then hitting an all is lost moment really led me to a deeper part of the life process. I think it's the same for writers. And as you mentioned earlier, I also think that writers can be an old soul at an early age due to what happens in their life process. And writers could come into writing at 50 plus and really have something to say and have it really thought out incredibly well. And I think it's through, I'm a definite believer that through the story structure process mixed with the emotional work and the belief in the writing is what leads to the outcome.
There are things you're supposed to do as a writer that you should do. You should make an outline, you should make your character breakdowns. There's all these things that you like do. You make your cards and you plot out your story, your first and second and third. I don't do any of that. I do none of it.
That's the perfect screenwriter.
Yes.
That's one that has the folded sock drawer.
Yes, that's the guy who does it all correctly. I don't do any of that. I like to sit and think about the idea, and then I like to think about the character, who that woman or man is, and what they're like and what their world looks like. And then I just start to think about what the movie might look like in my head. And once I sort of start seeing the movie itself in my head, then I start writing it. I don't know how it's going to end necessarily, unless it's a thriller. If it's a thriller, I need to know how it's going to end so I can know where I got to go, if that makes sense. You know, because you always want to have that ending that people go, oh. So you think of the ending first. Like, what would be a cool, oh. And then, oh, okay, now how do I get there? So I go backward if it's a thriller. If it's not a thriller, if it's just a story about people and life and love or whatever it is, then I don't really think that much about what's going to happen. I just sort of think about the people and where they are and where I want them to be, what the world's like, what they enjoy. There's usually a lot of wine involved because I enjoy some wine. What happens is I end up writing, I think, something that's much more organic and much more, here I am a writer and I can't find a word. What is the word? Organic and what is it? What's the word when something just spontaneous?
Spontaneous. Okay.
Organic. I end up writing something that's more organic and spontaneous because I haven't sort of telegraphed it. And kind of like when you're acting, you know, you always hear, don't play result, you know, because you've read the entire script. So your character is on a journey. So you know what that journey is, but the character doesn't know. So you don't want to play like you know what's coming because you'll telegraph it to the audience. I find the same thing works for me as a writer. By not knowing everything when I'm writing, I'm discovering it as I'm writing. And it makes the writing process exciting for me because I'm like sitting there at the keyboard. I'm like, this is great. You know, people are like, well, what's going to happen next? Like, I don't know. I can't wait to find out either. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a spontaneous thing. And then hopefully the training and the laws of inevitability that I try to keep focused in my head, you know, kick in as I'm writing. And when it's done, it's a really great story. But yeah, I like to look at it as a living, breathing story that's unfolding as if I'm watching it. And that drives me toward the end. Because I feel like if I do all the outline stuff, for me, if I do all the outline stuff, I've already kind of done it already. So now it's like, oh, now I gotta write it all. I already figured it out. So I just like to jump in and start writing.